The National Organization for Marriage. I've been asked to speak briefly on entrepreneurial leadership. We will begin with jargon, but I promise we won't end with jargon. What is entrepreneurial leadership? Well, the dictionary definition is organizing a group of people to achieve a common goal using proactive entrepreneurial behavior by optimizing risk, innovating to take advantage of opportunities, taking personal responsibility, and managing change within a dynamic environment for the benefit of the organization. That is not exactly what I'm going to be talking about. It is, but I will try and refrain from using that jargon. What I want to talk about is that at this time in history, when we see the other side, those who oppose our views on life and marriage, tremendously well-funded, many more organizations that are doing different things. You have groups like the Human Rights Campaign, which is a more of an umbrella group. We have many smaller groups that are taking different parts of the attempt to redefine family and gender, from gay, lesbian advocates and defenders, focusing on the legal side, to Freedom to Marry, which was a new group. That our side has not had the same focus on both looking at problems, looking at specific problems, trying to address those problems by using the most innovative means we can, best practices, and working to achieve a common goal. It's pretty simple if you look at the sort of lay of the land at how many organizations are on the other side and what their budgets are. As an example, the National Organization for Marriage, our budget last year I think was around $11 million. Most of that money was spent in state campaigns. We gave a lot of that money away. The Human Rights Campaign alone had a $40 million budget, and it's only increasing. While we're one organization dedicated to proclaiming the truth of marriage and supporting the faith communities that sustain it, there are multiple organizations doing the same thing on the other side. Evan Wolfson has Freedom to Marry. That was an organization created to address the whole issue of same-sex marriage. Once that was achieved through the courts, they disbanded the organization and then created a new one called Freedom for All. I can't even go through all of the organizations, but just trust me, if you want to look, there are many organizations very well funded moving forward. So at times our side sort of brings its hands and says, what can be done? What I want to try and address here is the two different audiences. If you're not within these two audiences, I still think, I hope that I may be, it may be helpful, but the primary groups I'd like to address are those people who see a problem and are thinking about how to solve the problem and want to create something to do that, which has not been created. So the entrepreneur, the person that sees a problem, wants to address it, doesn't necessarily know how to, but I want to sort of give some guidance to those folks. The second are people that are currently running organizations that realize that maybe what they're doing isn't achieving the results that they would like. Sometimes results are outside of our hands. Courts decide things. There's a question as to how much control we may have of that. But thank you for coming up. So the second group are people currently managing organizations or involved with an organization that want to be able to do more. A little brief background on what I do. I am president of the National Organization for Marriage, but before that I headed up a group in Connecticut called the Family Institute of Connecticut, and I've had an experience going back to basically 2000, where at the time I thought I was going to be a professor. I was at Oxford, I was studying history, I was getting ready to do my dissertation at UCLA. I had been involved in the pro-family movement, but I hadn't led anything. I was called because I had been student body president at my college, and I had been active in these fights, but not heading anything up. And a gentleman called me from Connecticut and said, do you want to restart an organization in Connecticut dedicated to fighting for faith, family, and freedom? And I said, well, I'll have to think about it. I talked to my wife, and I thought it was a great opportunity, and I moved to do that. Through that process, we grew the Family Institute to be one of the largest state family policy councils. These are groups associated with Focus on the Family. There are 38 throughout the country. Ours, Connecticut, is not an easy place to be involved in these sorts of issues. But we did eventually become one of the largest groups in the Northeast. And from there, I created with others a number of other organizations. One was the National Organization for Marriage. We also created an organization called Act Right, which is modeled on a group on the left called Act Blue, which has bundled over $400 million now to Democratic candidates for office. And they had a very simple idea, which was we need to make it as easy as buying a hamburger to donate to a candidate. We need to take the difficulties of reporting and the legal issues away from individuals. We'll do all that, and we'll have one central place where you could give to any liberal candidate. And nothing like that existed on our side, and so we created Act Right. We are far behind them. They've been around for since, I believe, 2000. We were started only 3 years ago, but we've already bundled $9.4 million to candidates and causes. That's not money coming to us. That's money going out to good pro-family candidates and causes. We have a long way to go, but I think the reason I was asked to speak on this is because I have created a number of organizations. We've made mistakes, but we've been able to keep them going and grow. And so I just want to lay out some of my experiences, what I have seen is effective and not so effective on our side, and hopefully that will help these two groups going forward. I think that the most important thing that I hear time and again, and I've talked to folks here, is why are we doing this? We need to be doing this. And I often say, well, then do it. And then they say, well, how? How do we do it? So I think that there is a bit of a disconnect on folks on our side wanting to do things, but the knowledge of how do I create an organization? How do I figure out if another organization is doing what I want done? And how do I take my passion and convert it into something real, where I'm not just spinning my wheels? And I think the first place to start, even though I've been to plenty of strategic planning meetings where I think, why am I doing this? I should be out doing something else. I do, though, think that the place to start is that we don't often spend enough time thinking about what we're doing. Instead, we want to do. And that creates a situation in which there's not a lot of self-reflection. And one of the things that scholars of entrepreneurial leadership focus on is working and thinking about your work, not just doing. Now, at times, you may be doing everything that I'm about to lay out, and you don't have it in your head that this is what you're doing, but you're still doing it. That's great. But it's a worthwhile exercise to start thinking more systematically about how we should be working if we're attempting to lead an organization. And so I do think that starting at the basic, Newt Gingrich in '94, before the House had its great majority, went into a room and put up 3 words on a blackboard, and he said, vision, goals, strategy. Very simple. And this is what you get in traditional strategic planning. But I don't think we do it often enough. So if you are a person that wants to begin a group or working with in a group, I think the first place to start is just start here. What is my vision? What is the passion? What is the problem that I see that isn't being addressed? And for organizations, at this Congress, all over. A mission statement is sort of a beginning part of that vision. It's the only thing. Then what are your goals? What are the concrete objectives you want to achieve? What is your strategy? What is the larger means by which you will achieve those goals? And finally, what are your tactics? These are the 4 classic parts of strategic planning, but I think even if you may disagree, and I've been in plenty of these meetings where there's arguments over, well, is that a strategy or is that a tactic? I don't want to get into that. That doesn't matter that much. But what does matter is that we try and think through what we're doing. As an example, if we think about the effect that David Dalladine at the Center for Medical Progress had, then we think about what he's done and go back to, well, what was the vision? Well, the vision was stopping Planned Parenthood and exposing Planned Parenthood and stopping the funding that they were receiving. In a broader way, in a more passionate way, saving babies' lives. That's clear in if you hear David speak, you see it with Lila. But then what were the goals? Saving babies' lives is the vision. The goals, cut federal funding for Planned Parenthood. What was the strategy? Well, we're going to do undercover videos exposing what's going on in Planned Parenthood. Sounds simple. And what are the tactics? Well, did they release all the videos at once? No, they were very smart. The idea was we're going to get one video out and it's going to be relentless. The media will eventually have to cover it because as people start talking about the first video, we'll release the second. There'll be more and more buzz. Then we'll go with the third. The people who are saying, well, we're just editing the videos or we don't really have anything, the fourth will address that claim. There'll be there's a video of chatting over wine about selling body parts of babies when the people from the first video said, hey, we really don't have anything. So I think that's just an example of this simple idea of vision, goals, strategy, and tactics. The 5 qualities that I think are what you find in someone who is doing, is exhibiting entrepreneurial leadership, and again, for those who came in later, I gave the dictionary definition earlier. Number 1, vision and dissatisfaction with the present. I think all of us here have dissatisfaction with the present. We may not always necessarily have a vision, but it takes a certain type of person to follow Goethe, who had a famous quote, whatever you do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius and power and magic in it. Meaning, there are people who have dissatisfaction with the present, but feel powerless to change it. There are other people who may feel powerless, but take the risk of beginning something new. That really is at the core of entrepreneurial leadership. It's the type of person who says, I'm not only dissatisfied with the nature of the world around me, I'm willing to take a risk, I'm willing to fail in order to make that world better. That's always the risk that you take, the risk of failure. Knowing and taking advantage of your unfair advantages. People don't often think about unfair advantages as good things, but if you look at someone like Bill Gates, initially Bill Gates didn't necessarily start up with the idea, I'm going to have software in every computer throughout the country, I'm going to make software something that people buy and sell. In the 70s, that was sort of a revolutionary idea. But his unfair advantage was that he had been working on the basic programming language. He'd been working on other programming languages, and he knew more about this than anyone else. And as he was working, he had this unfair advantage of the knowledge opening up that what he was doing, which was initially applied to big businesses, huge computers, nothing like the PC, that at some point, the technology would move in such a direction that this same type of language could be used by the regular consumer. And he had the unfair advantage of knowing that this was the case, knowing the language and being able to convert it into a product that is that has revolutionized computing. You may not always have these, but this tends to happen with folks. There tends to be something that they have that other folks may not have, that they're willing to take a risk on in the future. Third, the ability to get people on board and to add to the vision. You're not alone. If you're alone, it's very difficult to create something new. If you believe, I have the vision, it's only me, that's it, you tend not to have successful organizations built upon the idea that it's my way or the highway. Now you have some folks who seem to get pretty near that, like Steve Jobs and others, but traditionally, even Jobs, there were people that were brought in, and he was able to inspire others with his single-minded commitment and devotion to the product and the beauty of the product he was creating. Flexibility to adapt, openness to feedback, and the ability to learn. Again, in the situation that we're in, when folks are building organizations, in direct mail, you may have a year where, oh my goodness, this is the basis of our financial support, and all of our organizations are seeing a downturn in direct mail. What's going on? And some organizations are willing to adapt. They change the nature of what they're doing in direct mail. They mail less letters, but they make the letters much more personal to folks. Or they move on to email and try different things. People have tried a number of things. There needs to be a willingness to say at some point what we've been doing all along, what was the basis of how we achieved our ends has changed. And so a refusal to be intransigent with whatever worked before. Persistence and execution. So much of what I've said, I think, is fairly obvious, this being the most obvious one. But I cannot tell you how many times I've talked to folks leading organizations, and when you really start talking, the basic things that should be getting done are not getting done, and there's a lack of persistence. Just because you fail the first time on again, using the direct mail idea, the first piece you send out doesn't do what you want it to do, doesn't mean you give up. You adapt, you try different things, you keep going. Again, very simple, but I've seen many organizations start and falter because there's simply a lack of persistence, a willingness to give up. And the points that I brought up before about vision, goals, strategy, and tactics, and the vision especially, that is the thing that motivates the people who have had failures, had another failure, but refuse to succumb, keep going, and eventually have success. These are qualities that I don't believe are born. There's sort of an argument in circles, is an entrepreneur born or raised? Many of us don't have all five of these qualities. There are folks that I know that say it's very difficult for me to adapt. I know what I'm doing, I know what we've done in the past, I'm going to keep doing it. But I think all of us, whether it's natural to us or not, have to learn these qualities if we want to grow the organization. Now, so that's a broad background. The thing that I hear more than anything else is, I've got a great idea. I know this will work. We need a Facebook page, Stand with Children, that rallies people who may not be completely on board on the marriage issue, but understand that there's something important about mothers and fathers to kids. Or any sort of idea. You hear ideas all the time, but I don't have the resources to do it. So it ultimately becomes a resource issue for people. I think one thing we need to realize is that nonprofits are not businesses. We can apply a lot of the models and ideas that scholars and others are talking about business, for example, strategic planning, but at the end of the day, what is the product? What are we trying to create? For all of us who are heading organizations, we are trying to change the world in some positive way. That is the product we are creating. That is not a product that can be bought or sold. So what is the relationship to that product to how we continue to function and how we can get the money to keep going? Well, I think we shouldn't view our donors as consumers of the product as much as we should view donors as partners in the entire effort. What I mean is, just as you are putting forward a vision and putting forward the goals of what you want to achieve, your donors are people who share this vision, or you've inspired them to agree with your vision, and they're partners because instead of having the ability to go out and do what you're willing to do with your life, they want to take their resources and say, I'm with you, but you're going to be the one to execute this. So they should not be treated as consumers. They should be treated as partners, not just as a fluffy, nice thing we say, but just as a business needs an angel investor, a nonprofit needs donors. And the donors are as core part of what you're doing as your vision, your skills, your execution, all of that. And they need to be treated that way. I'll tell you this, that organizations frequently say, we're doing all of this great work, and yet we can't find any funding. There is not necessarily, the other advantage in not viewing donors as consumers is there is not necessarily a direct correlation between the effectiveness of your ability to implement your goals, strategies, and tactics, and your success in getting partners to fund you. What do I mean? I mean, there are a number of organizations that raise large sums of money that are not necessarily that effective in what they're doing. Okay? That is just the reality on both sides. On the same token, there are organizations doing tremendous work that raise far less money than others. So part of the issue with partners is that donors often give and partner with you because of a connection to your personality. They trust you. They don't have the ability to look through every aspect of your plan. They don't have the time to look at every organization, so one way that they decide how to give funding is based on a personality, and that's just a reality. The second thing is that given this lack of time, what the press says about us may become just as important as what is actually true about us. So a donor sees you on CNN, you're out speaking about marriage or life, and they say, well, that must be the group that's doing the best work on marriage and life because he's on CNN or MSNBC. So, and then the third is, for sophisticated donors, there is an attempt to go through what you're doing, to look at your plan, and to say, this is good or bad. That would be the ideal, but that third part really, in my experience, isn't the overwhelming majority of donors. And what does that mean? That means that you must do the two other things. You need to be in the press, ideally. Most organizations here, if they don't go and get on shows, people don't know that they're doing what they're doing. It's just a reality. The other truth is that the time spent fundraising for a leader of an organization, after you've done all these other things, you cannot fear handing over to people who are experts, great in what they do, your little baby. You have to be able to do that because in this environment, one of your primary goals is to find more partners. You can't be doing all of the program, all of the implementation of your goals through strategies and tactics, and as well as doing all of the fundraising. It's simply, it's impossible. Now, in the very beginning of an organization, this is the norm, that the resources aren't there. So of course, for a short amount of time, you need to be doing everything. But that should not be the view. This works for anything, whether it's a relatively small project or a much larger project. If you find, and there are plenty of holes in our movement, if you find a hole to be addressed, and you think you can do something about it, you need to realize that your number one goal is to find partners so that your organization can do that. So I now spend probably 60 to 80% of my time, depending on the week, going and meeting with folks that want to partner with us, or could potentially partner with us. And in my relationship with those partners, I don't have the vision that every single meeting I have is going to be successful. People get depressed very early on. I'm talking to the head of another organization that's quite successful. They do great work. They're a $2 million a year organization, and they have no donors over, well, almost all of their donors are donors under $1,000. And the reason for this is there's a concern that, well, I've asked people for larger sums of money. I've gone to larger donors, and they say no. As a very practical level, just as in sales, you want to have a big pipeline for sales, and you're not assuming every single person is going to end up coming through, you need to realize that a lot of your time is going to be spent where you're going to get a no. But what I've found is even the folks that I've gone to and said no, and I've spent time flying out, you feel, we're human beings. You feel like, well, I could have been doing this, I could have been doing that, I could have been advancing our cause. A year or two later, that same donor says, I'm ready. So your time is not wasted in this part of building up the organization. I don't think we spend enough time at all on the practical side of fundraising. As a very simple matter, there are essentially two cohorts of donors: major donors and donors that are smaller donors. Major donors, someone who's going to give over $5,000. For some organizations that are much larger, that's 10, 20, even 100. The head of the organization, because of what I said earlier, the connection to a personality and trust, is the only person that's going to be able to go to that person and have them say, out of a limited amount of money that I give away, I have faith, and with all of these good causes, which I do not have the time to evaluate, that I'm going to choose you. I'm going to choose your organization. That is something that cannot be delegated to someone else, in my view. Organizations have great development directors. Groups like Heritage Foundation, raising $100 million a year. They have a great development director, a great development staff, but DeMint is still meeting directly with the largest donors, the Heritage Foundation. It's just the way it has to work. And it doesn't matter if you're a $100 million a year organization or you're starting as a $10,000 organization. It's the same thing, that in order for major donors to give to your organization, you, the leader, are going to have to be directly connected with them. It's just, I've never seen it work any other way. On our staff, the development staff tends to manage our direct mail and our email campaigns, occasionally some personal visits, but I tend to go around and try and gain partners by showing the vision, showing what we've done. Vision and trust are the two things that will most contribute to your ability to keep going, to raise money. The vision that you project, donors have to share, and they have to partner with that vision. The trust is either based on two main things. When you're creating a new organization, obviously you don't have a track record to go on. So the donors have to accept that your vision is so compelling, or your personality breeds such trust, that they're going to risk again, a limited pool of money by partnering with you rather than someone else. Live Action is a great example of this. Lila Rose is an amazing human being and friend. But you're in a room with Lila, and Lila's talking about all they've done. You've seen the videos, but her personality is also just, so cheerful, so optimistic, but also so willing to stand even in the middle of the most difficult situations on TV interviews or anywhere else, that donors, even early on, were willing to give and support Live Action, and Live Action continues to grow. So establishing that vision and establishing that trust, like any partnership, requires time, effort, commitment. You have to spend your time doing this. For existing organizations, pointing to successes is clearly what you're going to need to do, because donors want successes. You also have to be willing, though, to step up and admit failures. All of us make mistakes. There are failures. And with donors being upfront about it is a much better, first of all, it's a more moral thing to do, but it's a better thing to do for your organization, because that also breeds trust. People know, businessmen know that you're going to make mistakes. And rather than trying to hide for them, throwing them out and saying this is what we're going to do differently in the future is a much better, long-term, I've seen organizations have much better success continuing to move forward if they do that, rather than they try and somehow sweep it under the rug. It's also true that there are circumstances outside your control. There are changes, as the Supreme Court decision shows us. The court issued an opinion. The National Organization for Marriage, the day after, we put out our 5-point plan, which was substantially different than before the court issued its opinion. Before the court issued its opinion, we had rallies highlighting the diversity of our support, African American, Pentecostal, Hispanic leaders with Catholic, Mormon, Orthodox Jews, everyone together saying we believe marriage is the union of a man and a woman. Trying to work with scholars to try and influence Justice Kennedy. At the end of the day, the court ruled against us. So our plan beyond that was fundamentally changed. And you have to sort of, obviously, be prepared for that. Rather than wait for the court's decision, be prepared that the court will rule against you, and the next day we issued what's our 5-point plan beyond the court's decision. So that, number one, those folks that have faith in your vision and trust in you understand that you're thinking ahead and that you're a leader. You're not just following and trying to create a plan after the fact. But number two, to exhibit that quality I listed earlier about adaptability. We have to adapt. And as I said in my remarks before, the marriage fight is not over. We have the Supreme Court putting a lie into the law. Our job our job becomes harder, but it's even more necessary now than it was before. And when you say something like that, people have to believe that you believe it. And I do believe it. But once you lose faith in your own organization, in your own vision, that's the point at which you might as well have someone else take over, because you're not going to be able to continue to do what you're doing. I touched briefly on the final issue I want to discuss. I touched briefly on the fact that there are many different ways to move forward with funding. Some organizations spend almost all their time connecting with major donors. Some organizations spend almost all their time with small donor outreach. I'll tell you that if you're starting an organization or you have an existing organization and you do not have a regular mailing program, you are making a dramatic mistake. Even if the mailing program is only breaking even, we don't have the ability to command the heights of cultural power in this country. What I mean is that almost all of the centers of power are against us, whether it's in the media and academia. In place after place, the arenas by which people traditionally were able to get their message out are increasingly closed. Direct mail and email are a method of direct communication with your supporters that go completely around the traditional media. So even if we're experiencing, and I think it's probably true for most organizations here, a dramatically different environment in the returns on direct mail, that's not the only function of sending regular newsletters and updates, snail mail copies to your supporters. The function is creating a community, creating partners that maybe some time down the line will partner with you financially, but at least at the moment are a key part of your organization, because the message that you're projecting, they also can go out and voice in their own communities. The same is true of email, and it may be true in the future that what I'm saying is wrong, but it's not wrong right now. What I mean is, it may be true in the future that direct mail is replaced by another method of communication, email, for example. But at this point, I would strongly say that is not the case. You should be mailing. As far as email, there are many different strategies. I will say that the notion that you're going to raise a substantial amount of money with social media alone is not a notion that any organization that I'm aware of has had success with. What I mean is, email remains the means of electronic communication by which almost all of our organizations raise money online. Folks have tried Facebook, they've tried other methods. Even GoFundMe ends up in large measure being connected to email, because you've got to get the GoFundMe message out in some way. So I'm definitely, I see a future of crowdfunding and social media playing a much larger role, but again, it still is email based. For example, at our last March for Marriage, we decided to use GoFundMe, even though we have a separate crowdsourcing platform, Act Right. I told you earlier, we created this organization called Act Right. We can crowdsource funding for anyone. We did for Kim Davis, when GoFundMe said that they wouldn't allow GoFundMe to be used for Kim Davis. So why did we use a sort of competitor? Well, because people have gotten used to using GoFundMe. We weren't going to reach the same people through our traditional means, and so we used GoFundMe, but again, it was a lot of emails, and we ended up raising about $40,000 for a specific project, which GoFundMe is great for, which was we didn't have enough money to pay for buses coming to the march. So there are examples of, many examples of people successfully using other means of raising money, but being on a number of boards, I've seen the overwhelming majority of funding, even if there's even if organizations do it in different ways, is direct mail and email. That's the majority of where the funding is coming from. And again, I'm separating out from major donors. So I've tried to touch on key points here. We won't take up the entire time. I think that thinking about what you're doing, thinking about how you're going to work, laying out your vision, goals, strategy, and tactics, realizing that your job, if you're creating a new organization, is going to be gaining new partners, realizing that the thing that you think is most fun, whether it be going on TV, speaking at events, is not actually the thing that's your job. It's a part of your job, but it's not your main focus. That you have to find folks who can continue your vision and implement that vision as employees of the organization, and that your role is to make sure that it continues to exist, that it continues to move forward, and that you have more and more partners. So with that, I'll open it up